Have you ever really stopped to think about the unsung heroes of our cities? I mean, the civil engineers, they design basically everything, right? Our homes, the foundations, those huge bridges we cross every day, we just, rely on them. But here's something that might surprise you. What if the actual rules, the fundamental regulations for how these structures get designed and built are completely different depending on where you are in the world? So today, that's what we're doing, a deep dive. We're going to unpack the really big differences in how civil engineering firms get approved, how they're regulated, comparing India with places like the US, the UK, and Canada. And we're sticking just to the sources you shared with us. This isn't like just about red tape or paperwork. It's much deeper. It's about safety. It's about the quality of what gets built. And well, who's responsible when things go wrong?
That's a really crucial point you raise, because to set the scene here, the main contrast is pretty stark. You have developed nations that rely very heavily on strict licensing, on clear accountability for engineers and their firms. And then you have India, which often takes a, let's say, looser approach. It's more about registration. Understanding that difference is key, really, to seeing the real world impact it has on, construction quality and safety.
Okay, that contrast you mentioned, looser registration versus rigorous licensing. That sounds fundamental. Can you walk us through what that actually means for a company? Like, how do they even start operating? What's the first step, the approval?
Sure. So in India, firms mostly register with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. Sometimes it's just local city bodies for like a trade license. But the critical thing here, and this is really important, is there's no legal requirement for these firms to employ licensed engineers. And the firms themselves, they don't need a specific civil engineering license either. Now, there are bodies like the Engineering Council of India, sure, but their certification, it's voluntary, not mandatory. Even getting on government lists, empanelment with the Public Works Department, CPWD, that's optional too. And it often seems to be based more on the size or the value of projects they've done before, rather than, say, their technical skill or innovation.
Okay, so that's India. How does that stack up against the US or the UK then?
Oh, it's a completely different world, really. In places like the US, UK, Canada, firms must employ licensed engineers. Think professional engineers, PEs in the States, or chartered engineers, CE in the UK. It's a requirement to legally offer engineering services.
So you can't even open your doors without them?
Essentially, yes. Those licenses are absolutely vital. They're needed to sign off, to stamp design drawings, to offer consultancy. You can't do it without that licensed professional taking responsibility. And you have strong authorities overseeing this. State boards in the US, Companies House, and the Institution of Civil Engineers, the ICE, in the UK, provincial regulators like PEO in Canada. It's built around qualified, legally responsible individuals.
Right. So if India doesn't require these licensed engineers, and the firms aren't licensed in the same way, well, it feels like there could be huge gaps in oversight, which leads me straight to quality control.
Yeah.
And accountability. If you don't have that mandatory licensing layer, what ensures things are built properly? And what happens if they aren't?
That's exactly the core issue. In India, proper quality checks, audits, they're pretty rare. You usually only see them mandated for the really big government projects. And here's a massive difference. There's generally no mandatory professional indemnity insurance.
No insurance. You mean if a design fails?
Exactly. Firms can often operate without legal liability for design flaws or structures underperforming. It's a significant gap.
Wow. So the risk isn't really on the firm?
In many cases, no, not in the same way. It kind of shifts the burden, you could say. Now, things like ISO 9001 for quality management, they're encouraged, but they're definitely not enforced across the board.
Okay, so contrast that again with the developed nations. How do they handle quality and liability?
It's much more embedded. Mandatory quality verification, frequent audits, especially on public projects, are common. You often see ISO level compliance being strictly enforced. They have these robust QA/QC systems, quality assurance, quality control built right into the design and construction process. That often includes things like independent third-party reviews of the designs, plus detailed health, safety, and environment HSE audits.
And the insurance?
Crucially, yes. Professional indemnity insurance is very often mandatory. There are clearly defined liabilities, specific insurance coverage requirements. This makes firms legally and financially liable if their designs fail or are flawed. When a PE or a CE stamps a drawing, their professional reputation, their finances, potentially their license is on the line.
That accountability piece sounds huge. It's a completely different level of risk for the firm.
It absolutely is. It fundamentally changes the incentives and the level of rigor.
Okay, so we've talked about licensing, accountability. What about the more technical side, the actual standards they build to, the tools they use, like digital modeling? Are the gaps similar there?
Yes, there's a noticeable difference there too. India primarily uses the IS codes, Indian standards, but you often hear them described as, well, perhaps a bit outdated or very much focused on manual calculations and methods. Things like BIM building information modeling and other advanced digital design tools. They aren't generally required by law.
Not mandatory, even for big projects.
Not usually. You might see exceptions for some specific metro rail projects or maybe some city-level smart infrastructure initiatives, but it's not the norm.
And in the developed countries.
There, you tend to see standards like Eurocodes, ACI codes in the US, BS codes in the UK, and these are regularly updated. They're much more integrated with current technology and analysis methods. And BIM, it's actually mandatory for public sector projects in quite a few countries now. The UK, Finland, Norway are examples. Plus, you have certifications like ISO 19650, which is all about managing information in BIM projects, and LEED for sustainable design. It pushes a more modern digital approach.
Okay, so let's try and pull all these threads together. We have differences in licensing and accountability and insurance and technical standards and digital tools. What does this all mean for the average person, for the buildings going up, the bridges, the infrastructure? What are the actual real-world consequences we see in India because of these differences?
Well, the consequences can be quite serious and unfortunately very real. A major one is a significantly higher risk of structural failures. We see too many structures that fail or, just don't perform as they should, often because the design was done by firms that might not be fully qualified or aren't operating under that strict licensing regime.
Give some examples.
Yes, and the sources highlighted some compelling and quite tragic ones. There was a partial collapse of a multi-story apartment building in Gurugram in 2023. A private building under construction collapsed in Chennai in 2022. A brand new flyover in Surat showed major cracks back in 2021. Even a water tank bursting in Bengaluru in 2020.
Those are stark examples.
They are, and they point towards potential systemic issues, not just isolated incidents. This ties back to that low accountability we talked about. Without mandatory licensing and robust enforcement, firms can sometimes operate without facing serious legal consequences when things go wrong. Another consequence is that engineering services themselves tend to be undervalued. Engineers might be seen more as just a cost to be minimized on a project rather than, critical experts ensuring safety and long-term performance.
That perception must affect the industry itself, right?
Absolutely. It impacts everything from attracting talent to fostering innovation and upholding ethical standards. If the focus is just cost-cutting on engineering, safety can be compromised. And finally, on a global scale, it can limit international recognition for Indian firms. Unless they go the extra mile to get ISO certifications or build international partnerships, it can be harder to compete globally.
That paints a very concerning picture, the link between regulation and real-world outcomes like safety and recognition. So if these are the challenges, the obvious next question is about solutions. What can India potentially learn from these other countries? How could it move towards a system that maybe addresses some of these issues?
Well, the sources suggest several clear steps India could take to move towards what you might call a more competency-based model. First and foremost, introducing mandatory licensing, not just for individual engineers, but for the firms themselves. That's seen as fundamental for accountability and raising professional standards across the board.
Okay, licensing first. What else?
Second, really enforcing third-party design checks and audits. Having an independent set of eyes review the plans before construction starts could catch a lot of potential problems and significantly boost safety. Then, strengthening the role of bodies like the Engineering Council of India, giving them teeth, perhaps, to establish and manage a robust national system for professional registration and certification.
Makes sense. What about the tech side?
Right. Making BIM and other digital design tools compulsory, at least for larger public infrastructure projects, that would help modernize practices and improve coordination and efficiency. Also, encouraging and maybe eventually mandating quality standards like ISO 9001 and the BIM standard ISO 19650. That improves quality assurance and helps firms compete internationally.
And the insurance.
Absolutely critical. Mandating professional indemnity or PI insurance. This is key for protecting clients, the public, and making firms ethically and legally responsible for the quality and safety of their designs.
It sounds like a significant shift would be needed. Are there big hurdles?
Oh, undoubtedly. The scale of India's construction sector is enormous. You'd need massive coordination between government, industry, professional bodies. And there's a cultural shift involved too, moving from a less regulated space to one with more stringent rules and enforcement. But the argument is that the benefits for safety and quality would make it worthwhile. So to sort of sum it up, India's system currently looks more procedural, more about the paperwork. The developed nations' systems are more explicitly license-based, focused on proving competency. And the sources really argue that shifting towards that competency model is, well, pretty crucial for the future of India's civil engineering sector, for safety, and for its global standing.
It's really fascinating. This whole deep dive just underscores how these regulatory frameworks, which most of us never even think about, have such a direct, profound impact on the safety, the reliability of literally everything built around us. It's not just bureaucracy, it's foundational to our physical world.
It really is a powerful thought, isn't it? Maybe the next time you, our listener, see a new building going up or drive over a bridge, take a second. Think about how deeply things like competence, accountability, and innovation are all tangled up in a country's infrastructure. Making changes in these sort of foundational systems, it can literally reshape a nation's future, its safety record, its place in the world. You might just look at that structure a little differently, thinking about those hidden layers of regulation or the lack thereof holding it all together.